Welcome, everyone, to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, and he probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. Of course, it's Marco the Contrarian. I've been on the Contrarians many, many times with and without Marco, and I've had him on as a guest a couple of times at least. We're talking about Kiss bootlegs, I know. But for this is a very special episode. We are talking about the band Mystique. Marco's got the shirt on, very, very cool logo. And this is somewhat obscure Canadian hard rock metal band from the early 80s. There's a documentary coming out. But for Marco, this isn't just about a cool obscure band that he happened to discover and like. There's a deeper connection here. So I'm going to let Marco explain the history of Mystique and his connection to this band.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Tim. I actually appreciate this a lot. It's funny because I've been talking about this documentary with some folks for a long time now. And it's interesting that, well, not interesting, but it's actually coming out finally. It's been years. I've been working on this since 2017. The band Mystique, I'm related to the vocalist. So that's where that connection comes from. So the vocalist is my uncle, he's my dad's brother. They formed in 1983 and they were around the local Hamilton area, but they played outside of Hamilton quite a bit up until about 1989, almost 1990. It was just before 1990, I think, that they were working on their final recording, and then the band ended up splitting up for different reasons. But yeah, so they were around for a good chunk of almost the whole decade. They were around in the local Hamilton scene. Now that in itself would be pretty obscure to make a documentary about a band that was kind of a local band to like one city. But the thing about Mystique was while they were around, they made some recordings, which was not super common for bands, I guess, local bands in the early 80s. It was really difficult to get, especially in like Hamilton or a Canadian city. It was really difficult to get into a recording studio. It cost a lot of money that a lot of bands didn't have. So not a lot of those bands, unfortunately, have, vinyl recordings or even cassette, or actually cassette is a little more common later in the 80s to see demos and stuff like this. But not a lot of bands have vinyl recordings. Mystique were able to get into the recording studio a couple of times, in one case internationally, and they put some releases out that years later, folks around the world started collecting. And every one of their releases is actually a valuable collector's item to most like metal collectors and vinyl collectors and stuff like this. And then my Contrarians co-host Martin Popoff. He wrote a couple of books about collecting vinyl and things like this, and he mentioned Mystique in those books. And so he's graded or he's priced their vinyl. When his book in 1998, The Record Collector's Guide to Heavy Metal, came out, there's a little thing about Mystique in there. And then when he reviewed all the albums, the Heavy Metal Collector's Guide to Heavy Metal Reviews, Volume 2, the 80s, that's where he reviewed the original EP that Mystique put out. He gave it, actually in the book, he gave it an extremely high rating. He gave it a 9 out of 10, the first EP. And I think I saw somewhere online that I think there's only 100 bands that got 9 or more in the book. And there's a lot of bands in that book. I don't know if that was they were just commenting on the 80s guide, but yeah, well, I might as well hold it up, but this is the book.
I know, I've got the original version of that Martin put out, his very first book, which is called Riff Kills Man. And he actually said in the preamble to that book that he made a conscious decision to downgrade 9s to 8s so that he saved his, 9s and 10s for just what he considered to be the very best of the best. So for Martin to give a 9, he was really, really into it. That's what that tells me.
Yeah,
since we, getting to know Martin, I really like he's really, really honest with what he thinks about these albums. Okay.
Yeah, there's the review, Black Rider. You can see at the bottom, rating 9. Yeah, he gave it an incredible review. And I showed that to my uncle because the thing, I know we're kind of jumping all over the place already right off the bat, but I mean, like when my uncle, my uncle was a vocalist in a handful of bands from the early 80s, around 1980, maybe even late 70s. I think he was in high school bands up until the mid 90s. After he got out of the music business, or he stopped playing for a little while, he ended up going back to school for computers and stuff like this. Like, he didn't think anybody ever cared about any of the old bands that he was in. So when I started discovering his music and going online in like the late 90s, early 2000s, and searching this stuff up and discovering that, yeah, your old band was in this book, people are looking for it online, blah, 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 blah. I was the one that revealed that to him. So he had never even realized that was happening. So when I pull up a book and see, look, there's this, there's that, he was just floored by it. He was kind of freaked out by it.
So just curious, that looked like a relatively short review in Martin's book. Do you want to read that review?
Oh yeah,
I'm just curious. I'm curious. Like, we all know Martin's writing style. I'm curious what he said about this.
Yeah, so he said this is about the Mystique Black Rider. So this is I can show you the vinyl. So this is actually a sealed copy of Black Rider. I have 3 copies. One of them's opened and in rough shape, and I've got 2 sealed copies. This is the original vinyl.
I've got. I just.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I actually, something. I got this off Discogs from Greece.
Right.
Yeah. So this is like a 30th anniversary, and it's got extra stuff on it too. Like, it's got "I Am the King" and "Rock and Roll Party," and like it's got all of their recordings on it. But yeah, it starts off with the original. But we'll get into that later. But
yeah, so this is the original vinyl that came out in 1985. It's sealed. That's the back of it. So Martin actually got his hands on this vinyl back some point, either in the 80s or the 90s, because when I interviewed him for this, he told me that he had like record collecting friends. So he had a huge record collection, and he had friends that collected records, and they would kind of like go over and listen to each other's stuff. So either he owned it or one of his friends owned it, but this was his review of it when this book came out. I don't know if this review is in, or if Mystique is in the original Riff Kills Man. I've never.
Well, hold on. You look for that. I'll find out if it's in Riff Kills.
Okay, cool.
Because it wouldn't have meant anything to me if it was. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't have known about it.
Yeah. Do you want me to read the review?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so his review is Mystique Black Rider, World 85. Way indie from Hamilton, Ontario, no less, but you'd be wise to snag the sucker if you ever see it, because the tunes enclosed are stellar. Mystique, combining Priest, Heap, Purple, and Maiden to much success, reason being the band's drop-jaw amazing vocalist and the guitar work of Dave Dragos, which is of vast metal intelligence. The band also make wise use of keyboards, killing with authority on these 4 tracks and 1 intro. A damn shame these guys never got past the lowliest of indie status, because musically anyway, this one's Canuck mythical, up there with Kraken, rating 9 out of 10. So that was before the album really kind of took off on, like, there were collectors looking for it back then, and you would occasionally come across stuff online, like somebody's vinyl want list, and you would just see like Mystique Black Rider 1985. That was before the album started picking up. You can find charts. I actually have showed some of the stuff in the documentary about when he priced it in this, and it's in this book as well. And he's got a picture of the band in here. And again, he didn't put a lot of pictures, but he put Mystique's picture, and he priced it. And I think he priced it in near mint $60 American, I think.
Okay.
Right?
It's actually not in this. I'm a little surprised. And it's not even in, like, at the end, in the end of this, there's a list of albums that he didn't talk about. And it's not even in there. So either, he hadn't discovered it at that point, or it got forgotten. But yeah, it's not in the original version of that.
Good to know. Now I don't have to collect that one for that purpose. But so he gave it this rating before this album started selling for like hundreds of dollars. So he gave it this rating when he priced it at about $60, which probably in the 90s was probably pretty fair price. But now, I mean, I think the last time it sold on eBay, the original vinyl, not the 30th anniversaries, I think it sold for over $800 Canadian. And that was in 2016. Now there's a whole bunch of inflation and all kinds of stuff going on in Canada. So or that might actually devalue it because people don't have money to spend, whatever. But it probably will continue to rise from there, I'm guessing.
Well, yeah, because I mean, that's all there was, right? It's not as if it was a mass-produced thing. So I mean, So from your earliest memories, I mean, what was that like? Were you aware at the time that your uncle was a rock singer and was playing in bands? Like what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So the way that I got connected to the music was, as a young kid, I got introduced to Kiss at like a super young age. My aunt was a huge Kiss fan. My uncle's sister and my dad's sister was a huge Kiss fan. She had all the home video releases and all kinds of stuff, all the albums, everything. She went to see them. I think the first time she saw them was in like Canada in like 1975, like the very first time they ever came to Canada. So she gifted either myself or one of my brothers the Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park World Vision cassette tape when we were kids. And I saw that. I must have been either earlier than 4 years old or 5, right around that age. And that brainwashed me. As soon as I saw it, I was like a Kiss fan. I didn't even know that they had this whole band thing going on. I just thought they were superheroes and whatever. So that had a huge impact on me. And from then on, I watched that tape until it literally started, like, old VHS tapes would start to, like, portions of the video you couldn't even watch. It would
The
just,
picture would yeah, the oxide would wear off, and yeah, the tracking would get all messy. Yeah.
and then I started getting introduced through my aunt to stuff like Animalized Live and the home video
Exposed.
releases, Exposed, stuff like that. And I just started becoming a big Kiss fan. So I bought my first Kiss album, I think, when I was like between the age of like 7 and 10, somewhere in there. I started buying Kiss albums. First one I ever bought was Kiss Alive 3, and people started gifting me Kiss albums. I saw Kiss in 1998 when I was 10 years old at the Psycho Circus tour. Anyways, so I was getting into like rock music, and my uncle, even from a very early age, he had long hair, he had a big personality. Um, and I can't remember when I knew he was a vocalist, but it was very early on. And I remember seeing, because he was in a couple of bands, my aunt had a framed 8x10 of an old, like he was in like a top 40 band in like 1980, 81, called Metro. I actually have a cassette of them performing or rehearsing or performing live. He was in a few bands like that. Teacher's Pet was another one. And I remember seeing that the picture it was an 8x10 framed on the wall. So there was that going on. And then I remember finding some of the albums he had recorded, and like even the Black Rider one. Like I remember picking it, like seeing that at my grandmother's house and being like, what is this? Because I was a kid and I didn't have any conception of what vinyl was.
Yeah.
So like I remember seeing my uncle and being like, what is, like I didn't quite understand, but I was too young to really like
It would be
ask
that
or
would be a strange concept, so that looks like him, and that yeah, that's his name. What is this?
yeah, I didn't understand what it was. And then I remember going through my uncle's albums at some point. It's all in my mind, is all broken pieces, but at some point I remember going through boxes at my grandmother's. She had kind of like, my uncle kind of had like a little office set up there. He had already moved out, but some of his stuff was still there. And because he had a family and stuff like this. I remember going through the vinyls, and I remember somehow getting a hold of Scorpions Worldwide Live. And I remember opening it and seeing like that sea of heads that goes into the horizon, and it almost looks like it goes into infinity. And I remember thinking like, oh, okay, so this is what like Mystique used to do. And
Okay,
in my
yeah,
head,
yeah, yeah.
for some reason, I thought, okay,
He was
there's
a rock star.
Scorpions. Yeah, there's Scorpions and there's Mystique.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I just put them with those bands. And eventually I got my hands, as I got older, I got more and more curious about stuff like that. And I got my hands on some tapes that he had at my grandmother's house. And I just used to steal them from my grandmother's and bring them to my house. And I would listen to them. And the first time I ever heard Black Rider, I have the CD here. It blew me away, because like I was already into hard rock, like Kiss and stuff like this. And I think that was when I was in later grade school. So I was like in grade 6, 7, 8. And that's when I started listening to AC/DC, Rush, Tom Sawyer. I remember seeing on Much Music, Power Hour, I think. And that was the first time I remember thinking, oh, okay, there's other music other than Kiss. And that was when I was like in grade 6, 7.
Yeah.
I remember thinking like Rush, I like Tom Sawyer.
There's so many people that like it started with Kiss. It's really cool to see that.
Yeah, and then when I put the tape on, it was like a tape that had Black Rider on there. It blew me away. I was like, oh, I love this.
Yeah.
It hit me right off the bat.
I mean, listen, just talking about the music. I mean, your uncle's got some pipes. Like he's a great vocalist. I hear I don't know. My first impression when we first started talking about this a while ago, I just went on YouTube, and my first impression is I hear a little Dio, and I hear a little David Coverdale in his voice, um, somewhere in the middle. In other words, what I'm saying is he probably would have been, great for a band with Richie Blackmore. But speaking of Deep Purple, that they got the keyboards too, which I thought was really cool. So it's like a cross between like a more like it's metal for sure, but it also has like more melodic elements because of the keyboards, but almost a gothic thing, like kind of a bridge between, say, like different eras of Rainbow. But really, really heavy.
Yeah, he was a big fan of actually his favorite band is Led Zeppelin, but he was a big fan of Whitesnake, Deep Purple, Dio.
Yeah,
Like I remember going through his records, he had Burn.
yeah,
I remember if I was ever in the car with him, he'd be blasting like Whitesnake, stuff like that. He was and there are some he did he did take some of like David Coverdale, Ian Gillan in particular. You can hear some screams that he does. I
yeah,
think it's in I Am the King. He does some screams that are kind of Ian Gillan-esque.
yeah,
But he was influenced by all of that melodic, heavy
yeah.
metal,
I
hard
can, I
rock.
can, I can definitely hear it. Just to rewind a little bit, when you said he used to be in a like the top 40 bands, do you remember what songs they would cover? Did you ever hear any of the?
I did hear the songs, and I remember being quite surprised that they did some of the songs that they did. I know I actually have, well, he has set lists and stuff like this. And I remember seeing he was in a couple, Metro and Teacher's Pet were two of them for sure. And I know I have taped somewhere. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but it was like, I remember thinking like, wow, I'm surprised they're doing these songs because they were like top 40, like rock type
Yeah,
songs.
so like poppier than the music he ended up doing. Were they doing like Journey or Loverboy or REO Speedwagon or
I know that they went into the studio and recorded a cover of Shaken All Over, which the Guess Who I think also
yeah, yeah, that's like an
recovered.
early Guess Who song.
Yeah, so that if that gives you any indication of what they were doing live, they did that.
I was
Yeah,
just curious.
I think you're right in there. I'll see if I can pull up
I'm just
the
thinking of what would have
songs
been
and
like top 40 rock at the turn of the 80s, and those are the first bands that came to mind. Probably maybe April Wine, like we're in Canada, so
that's a good question. I have to go back and look at that, and I'll send you
cool.
a list of some songs that they were doing in
But
that
that
era.
that's getting us off track. So yeah, you find out that your uncle had a band or had several bands, has recordings. I mean, that's got to be a little surreal because it's you slowly realize that it doesn't matter the level of success that any of these bands have come to. They're just people. They would all have families. They would all have you know friends and just people that they know outside of that world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I grew up, he was my uncle. So like I grew
Yeah.
up having Christmas dinners with him and stuff like this. And it wasn't until I was a little bit older when I really started becoming fascinated in this music and stuff. And it intrigued the hell out of me. Like
Yeah.
I didn't understand it. I didn't know what it was. I think it took me a while. I think I really listened to it a lot before I even started asking him questions. You know what I mean? And that was when, we started getting internet and stuff like this. So I started looking online because like when you see something like this, you're like, that looks like all the other albums, right? So
Yeah.
you think like people must know this band. And I would
Yeah.
Google and I go on the internet. And when I first started Googling them, there was hardly anything. If you Google them now, you'll see pictures, you'll see video, like YouTube links to videos, you'll see and I didn't even do any of this stuff, but you'll see people have scanned images and put them onto like Metal Encyclopedia. The Metallum Encyclopedia has a
Yeah.
whole list of their recordings and all the liner notes and all this stuff. I didn't do any of that stuff. So
So it
people
kind of
were,
took on a life of its own.
yeah, people have kind of been cataloging this stuff and but back when I started Googling them, there was nothing. It would like literally you would Google search and just go through pages and find somebody's, oh, this is my vinyl want list and beat 100 albums. And in the middle, you'd see Mystique 1985 Hamilton or something. And you're like, oh, that has to be my uncle's Mystique,
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's cool. When I first listened to this, I thought, Black Rider. I get thinking about that. I'm like, I wonder if this has anything, if that's anything to do with Lord of the Rings, the ring wraiths. And I read the lyrics. I'm like, oh, definitely. Definitely. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, so that kind of drew me in listening to that. I think that's really cool. Now, um, another thing that I think is cool, and I'm probably jumping ahead in the timeline, but years before Metallica did it, Mystique covered "Stone Cold Crazy" by Queen,
That's right.
and I like their cover of it. It sounds really good.
Yeah, that was a suggestion. So there was it's funny that you bring up Lord of the Rings. I'll just cover that real quick. That actually was an influence, and it's talked about in the documentary about why they pick Lord of the Rings and stuff like this. But the Stone Cold Crazy thing, they had a relationship with a gentleman named Lee Cazzaro. He owned Saturn Productions in Hamilton, which was a music store where you could buy instruments and also a rehearsal space. And he also had recording equipment, and he would help with like live production and stuff like this, like soundboard recordings and stuff. And a lot of unfortunately, this gentleman, I've gotten to know him quite a bit. He's in the documentary. He was very close with the band. He recorded some of their demos at the rehearsal studio and stuff like this. I think he was the one that suggested to them, if you're going to do a single, why don't you kind of put on like an obscure kind of song from a big band like Queen? And he thought my Uncle Ray's voice was suited to Freddie Mercury's voice, I guess, in some ways. So he kind of suggested to them, like, this might be a good way. Like, yeah, you might play the rock and roll party tonight song, but they might also play this kind of obscure song. It might get you on the radio a little bit by a big band, and I think that's why they did that song. And then, yeah, interestingly, I think Metallica did it a few years later. I don't think they had any idea there was a Mystique version.
No, it's just it's not a song that gets covered a lot.
Yes.
You know, sometimes when it's not like you hear, oh yeah, do Born to Be Wild. No, you know. So yeah, let's talk about Rock and Roll Party Tonight. Like, obviously, we're getting into the later '80s now. The production value goes up a little bit, but it's interesting because Rock and Roll Party Tonight, that's definitely Kiss influenced, like that title, you know, we're gonna have a rock and roll party tonight. That's a classic Paul Stanley line. When I heard this song, I thought it kind of reminded me of Poison. It kind of reminded me of I Want Action. Now, I like Poison, so I'm not slagging it, but it didn't sound anything like the Black Rider EP. It didn't have the goth thing going on. It just wasn't as metal. Was that, I mean, it's a familiar story. Was there pressure for them to do something that might have been a little more commercial?
Yeah, so absolutely. So they were in talks with several record labels. Elektra Records was one of them. MCA was another one. Elektra Records actually paid for them to go to France through I think like the Elektra European, because their second guitarist, Eric Nicola, is French, and he was from France, and he was the one that kind of initiated this agreement with Elektra, I guess a European version of it, to record over there. So they actually paid for my uncle and the original drummer, the two gentlemen who formed Mystique, to fly over to France and record the second. This is the second recording, I Am the King.
I'm the King, yeah.
Yeah, so this is like a 5-track. It kind of came out, it's pretty professionally put together. But this was the second recording. It's 5 tracks, just like the first EP. So it's kind of like a second EP.
So I think that's the second 5 songs on this disc then.
It's the 3, they put 3 songs from I'm the King on the disc.
Oh, okay.
So there's 2 songs on here that are not on the CD.
Okay.
This, you can tell by the photo that they are going really hair metal here.
Yeah, a little bit more glam. The hair's a little teased, and the pants, and yeah, like when I first looked at it, it kind of looks like Brighton Rock or somebody like that.
Yeah, so this version of Mystique is still super heavy, super progressive, like the original EP, but they were kind of going this way because I think there was some record label pressure to kind of like look like the other bands at the time. That song in particular was another step in that direction, because the record label's like, we want something commercial and something more, because that you probably at that time were not going to get on the radio very much with like a song like I Am the King.
Right.
But a song like Rock and Roll Party Tonight, when bands like, you know, like Rat, Motley Crue, Poison, like those were kind of like the big bands at that late 80s period.
Yeah.
So they were kind of going in that direction, because I think the record label was looking for something. The record labels they were talking to were looking for things that were more commercial to push.
It's interesting because, yeah, if you hadn't already made it um, earlier than that, playing the heavier music and reached a certain level, yeah, the record labels were bound to, kind of push you in that direction. And I hear a little bit of, like I don't think it's bad, but I hear a little bit of maybe, what am I trying to say? Like your Uncle Ray's got a great voice. It doesn't really suit that type of material. Like he's got the drama of a Dio or like, yeah, Freddie Mercury, Coverdale. But he was probably thinking, hey, Whitesnake are huge now. Maybe we can get in on that. Like I said, it's not a terrible song, but it just doesn't sound like one that they would have written just, hey, I've got an idea. It almost sounds like someone was saying, you know, uh, I don't hear a single, that sort of thing. That's interesting though that Elektra, I mean, Metallica on Elektra, I mean, Metal Church were on Elektra. Of course, more commercial bands like Motley Crue and Dokken, but that it just, hey, what it tells you is that the bands that we know of that were on major labels, there were so many that could have been and that came this close, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the deal was that Elektra owned the rights to I Am the King for Europe, but they didn't own it for Canada. So when they came back to Canada, and they decided that they were not interested in the Mystique business, they actually just produced this themselves.
Yeah.
So this was another independent release, but it was basically paid, the recordings were paid for by Elektra. Yeah. But to go back to the Rock and Roll Party Tonight thing. So what's interesting is if you look at the early recordings, because my Uncle Ray he kept almost, well, he didn't keep everything, but he's got like a box full of all kinds of stuff and like lyrics and all kinds of things. And they had song lists and lyrics for like all these songs that never got recorded, like dozens and dozens of songs. And like you look at the titles and the lyrics, they were all in that 84, 5, 6, maybe even 87-ish era. If you look at all the songs, they're like the Dungeons and things like
Yeah.
this, right? Songs that fit the Black Rider, I Am the King mold. When Rock and Roll Party Tonight happened, it was more kind of like they had the attitude of like, okay, you want something poppy? Okay, we'll give you something poppy. And they turned around and threw this song and a few others. There's some other demos that fit more in that Rock and Roll Party Tonight kind of LA scene, Poison-esque type songs that they recorded on a demo and sent that to MCA. And their final recording that was never released, they ended up in the studio to record a whole album. That whole album is all songs like Rock and Roll Party Tonight. So they've never been released. They were lost a long time ago. And there was they had about, I've seen all the lyrics and stuff like this. But they had a bunch of songs that were like, Let Me Loose in the Night, Cause It's Rock and Roll, things like that.
Yeah.
Shoot to Kill and Push Me. It was more getting into that commercially type of.
It almost reminds you of maybe in a reverse way of the Pantera albums from the 80s and then how heavy they became. But it was almost like in reverse.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think that's kind of what signaled the end of the band, because I don't think anybody was happy doing that stuff. I think they kind of, and it talks about it they all talk about how they felt doing those songs and why it was never released and why it was never finished. But I think they were more comfortable doing the progressive metal stuff, which wasn't catching on because it wasn't what was in the mainstream at the time, than they were doing the poppy stuff. But then it's interesting that years later, it was the progressive fantasy-based metal that they were doing that made them collectible and sought after.
Yeah, it's interesting too for a couple of things. I mean, like I'm a product of the hair metal era. That's the stuff that that I recently got into, and I have an affection for all that stuff. And the bands that were really good at doing that sort of pop metal, hair metal, that's just the music they wanted to play and write. That's just what came out of them naturally, was the commercially based, and lyrical approach. But if that's not where your heart's at, you can hear it.
Yeah.
And it's too bad, really, when you think about if they could have held on for a couple more years doing that original style. In '92, Dream Theater comes out with Images and Words, which goes gold, and they create this huge following. So there becomes an audience for progressive metal again. So it's almost like they were ahead of their time and they stopped just short of when that stuff became really popular.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have a clip that talks about the hair metal piece. If you want me to show it, it's
Let's
actually related exactly to what we're talking about.
let's do it.
Okay, so let me pull this up. Hopefully we don't have any technical difficulties. This should work. So I'm gonna hit play and you let me know if you can hear it. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear it and see it,
Okay.
and it works out. So let me see. Oh no, it's loading.
One of the suggestions he made was to make a really, really good poster, and that's where that full color poster came, with actually Les Wheeler in it and Eric and everybody. It was right at that weird transition when some of the glam bands were coming out as well. So we kind of went that way, but we still played a really heavy Euro metal type music.
Anybody that lived in Hamilton at that point in time has seen that poster. John and I would go around plastering that thing everywhere.
It didn't really match the music. It was cool to look at. People loved looking at it. Poison, we were Poison. You listened to Black Rider or I'm the King. Those songs were not Poison-esque.
Wow, so I'm looking at this Mystique poster, and this is EP era. So this is 1987. They've got a new logo, which is your basically cheesy-looking metal thing like this. It's got this cross, this sword in it. It actually looks like a Christian metal band. It looks a lot like a Striper idea, and the band, quite frankly, looks like they could be a Christian metal band. It's so pink and red and black. They are the quintessential metal band from head to toe. There's nothing about this that doesn't look perfectly put together to be a hair metal band.
I think that's probably a good place to cut it off there. But,
it's funny. The other thing, I was trying to think what that logo reminded me of. And I figured it out. It reminds me of the Pepsi Power Hour on Much Music, with the lightning bolts coming out of it.
Yeah.
For some reason in my mind, that's what I picture. And so that also brings to mind another question: did they do any videos?
No. So it's interesting. There's very little footage that exists.
Much Music would have played, because they played independent videos especially by Canadian artists. They definitely would. If they'd have sent a video, Much Music probably would have played it.
Oh, they had airplay. They had airplay in Canada and in France. For a while, their the cassette "I Am the King" actually ended up, because Eric was their guitarist, lived in France. He ended up kind of coming back and forth between Canada and France and trying to get things moving on both sides. So they actually I have a French magazine in here. It's a metal magazine that I'll grab it. Anyways, they were on the French, like France radio, and I have it looks like one of those heavy metal, like Metal Edge magazines, and inside there's a Mystique article. There's no photos, but there's a Mystique article, and it talks about them, how they recorded and stuff like this in France. But they had some airplay in France. Now, they actually were in talks a few different times. I have, my uncle has contracts, and I have the images of it, and you'll see it in the documentary. From, I can't remember the production studio, but they were talking to a production studio about doing a music video for Rock and Roll Party Tonight. So there was conversation of it, and I have physical evidence of contracts and all this stuff and the numbers and the idea for the video. They were going to film it like a 1930s kind of Hollywood Art Deco style, and they were going to do it like Mystique as this big letters, and it was going to be, that was the theme of it, and they were going to do that. But that was around the time that they were recording those final recordings, and the band ended up splitting up. They had been in talks before that. I think the problem was it cost a lot of money to do something like that.
Yeah.
And it was just finances. Like the first EP, they had financial backers. So that's why they had folks that believed in the music. And the original EP was very independent, because the individual who financed it, Ted Smirnos, it's interesting because I think he went to Greece.
I was going to say he's credited as
the producer of the first one.
But he's also got co-writing credits on Beyond the Four Winds, and it says he's the sole writer of Wake Up Screaming.
Yeah, Wake Up Screaming was his song. So part of the deal, he was, I don't know if we're jumping all over the place, but going back to the first EP, he was friends with John in high school. and grade school, maybe even. And they used to jam together and stuff like this. And when he heard what John was doing with Mystique, he believed in it right away. Now, I think he wanted to be a songwriter and performer himself, but I think he wasn't, I don't want to say he wasn't good enough, because I think, you know, there are photos of him on stage with the guitar and stuff like this, but I think he just couldn't play. Maybe he couldn't play at the level of like the musicianship going on in a band like Mystique. But he definitely wanted to get involved in the music business. So he thought, okay, if I can't play with them, then I can produce them. So part of the deal of putting out and financing the first EP was that he wanted them to record his song, and they love the song. And it's Wake Up Screaming.
It fits right in. It fits right in with the rest of the material.
Yeah, they were all for it. I think they were kind of like, well, if the song was no good, they wouldn't have done it, right? But they liked the song, so it happened to work out that way, and it fit the material. Yeah, exactly. So that's where that came about.
Some pictures, some random pictures that are inside the CD, including the Rock and Roll Party Tonight single, which you just showed. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, and here's actually a authentic T-shirt, because they did sell a lot of merch. So this was reprinted. I had this reprinted just for me.
Yeah.
This was an authentic shirt that they sold around that time.
Okay, cool.
So this is one you could legitimately buy, and they had a bunch of shirts. Like there's a whole bunch and you'll see all the merch that they had. They had buttons, they had stickers, they had all kinds of stuff like that, which was unusual for a band of their level. Well, they were pretty popular in Hamilton. And it talks about it in the documentary that like you go see a band back then and they might not have had T-shirts or recordings and stuff like this, but Mystique had everything. They had T-shirts, 8x10s, posters, stickers, buttons. You could go to a Mystique show and you could walk away with merchandise. So smart. A bunch of stuff like this you'll see in the documentary.
It's smart because it gives a light beyond that one performance, because someone's out there wearing a T-shirt and someone says, hey, that's cool, you know, what's that? Is that a band? Who's that? And then they come next time they come to play. Oh yeah, smart thinking. It's a shame, you know, like now you can film videos on your phone and do a pretty good job editing them. But yeah, it was a major, like it costs, you know, budgets for even independent videos would have been ridiculous. But it is a shame, because I have a feeling if there was just a soundstage clip of them, they probably would have gotten play, because I remember seeing all sorts of independent Canadian metal bands on the Power Hour back then. I mean, they Much Music just supported Canadian artists, period, no matter what genre. So that it's interesting that there were no. It's kind of too bad they didn't do, like, you know, back when they recorded the original EP, there wasn't a video for Black Rider. That would have been. I'm just trying to picture like some kind, you know. I just think it would have been cool.
Oh, tell me about it. The other thing I just want to mention quickly is part of the reason I'm doing this documentary is because it shines a light on a band that most people have never heard of. This band, but I mean, they had recordings, they traveled internationally, they had T-shirts, they had all of this stuff that you would have never even imagined. That, like, I could pull all kinds of stuff out to show you, contracts and letters from record labels, SOCAN stuff, airplay on radio, things like this.
They were making inroads.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But not only that, like, there was a lot of bands like Mystique doing stuff like that. Yeah. And if you go, Lee, the gentleman who owns Saturn Productions, if you go over to his house and go in his basement, he has almost like a museum of all these bands, local bands. He's got posters, flyers that people used to put up for their shows. Like I go over there, I'm like, dude, this stuff should be in a museum, because this is like music history and Hamilton music history. It's important. And I'm hoping that with a documentary like this, you'll see more stuff come out from bands in that Mystique vein of they didn't quite make it, but they had stuff that's worth discovering. And I think there's a lot of bands like that.
There's a lot of bands that probably have very, very similar stories to Mystique. You had a couple of other clips queued up.
Yeah, so I can show you a clip that talks about them in the early days. When I think this was right before they recorded the EP. And I have another clip of Martin talking about the album from a much later standpoint of when he kind of discovered it and why he put it in the books and stuff like this. So I'll show you the first clip first. So this is the first clip. This is right before they recorded the EP. So I'll play this for about 30 seconds or so.
But the one thing that we had in common, the one thing that we're above all else, was our drive to make it. We knew what we were shooting for, and we were going straight for it, and nothing was going to get in the way. Nothing.
Rehearsals were intense. Yeah, rehearsals were like, we're here to do a good thing. We're not monkeying around here. Rehearsals were like, we're taking this seriously. So I like that. There was a time to joke around, to laugh, and then there was a time to be serious and practice. And we would break apart bar by bar by bar and work at it.
They were probably practicing 3 times a week.
That's Lee
Okay.
from Saturn Productions. That clip of that music, that was from a rehearsal, it was just recorded off the floor. That's something that Lee would have recorded. And that's never been released, and that's never been heard before, that music. So that was something that they recorded, the original band, right before they went into the studio. So that was live right off the floor. That wasn't a live performance at a show, which there are some soundboard recordings that have survived, but that was just live off the floor in the rehearsal studio.
Yeah, there's one thing that's very clear when you're listening to any of these tracks. This band was very, very proficient, and you don't get that proficient without practice upon practice upon practice.
Yeah, let me show the next 10 seconds of this clip, because Lee was actually a musician. Now, he came from the 70s, Lee. So he recorded and played, he played in the 70s. And even back then it was harder to record. So he hardly has anything from his career. I touch upon it in the documentary because he was so close with the band. And he talks about Saturn Productions, which is part of Hamilton history. Yeah, a lot of bands came through there. But anyways, so he was a musician. And he respected Mystique. So let me just play the next 10 seconds, because he talks about the rehearsals like you were just mentioning.
On a pretty regular basis.
Especially during the Mystique years, they really challenged me to get better. But for those years, I would say about 2 to 3 hours a day, I would be practicing.
If it was late at night and studios closed and they were practicing, a lot of times I'd be up there running the board, and then once you got the board set up, you just let them play. So they were one of the few bands that I would stand and watch play, because they were good, and that's how you can tell when you start seeing people like that. So these guys were practicing even if they had no gigs, they were and that's kind of the school I came from. We practiced and practiced and practiced. It wasn't a chore. And those guys were one of the few bands that were willing to do that, or in some cases Ted, who...
Yeah, so that's him talking about that he was just, their work ethic.
Yeah.
Even when they had no gigs, they were going to the studio 3 times a week to rehearse.
It's almost like they knew what it took to get to a certain level, and to be that good, you can't not practice. And you've got to keep at it until it's perfect. You can't have a guitar string ringing. You can't fall behind on the beat or speed up too much or sing out of tune or any of that stuff. Yeah, because and even the Black Rider EP, I can tell that it's not, obviously it's not a big studio recording. It's not a big budget recording, but it still is a good mix. The vocals aren't buried, and especially with the fact that they had guitars and keyboards, sometimes that's hard not to drown each other out. It's recorded really, really well. So the clip that you had later of Martin Popoff, not only, this documentary is a way of shedding new light on a scene that needs to be remembered. All of these music scenes are worth remembering. But the reason that the Contrarians exist today has a lot to do with Mystique, does it not? Is that not how you and Martin got in contact?
Yeah, that's the only reason why the Contrarians exist. So it's interesting how life unfolds itself, right? Because here's Mystique doing something back in the 80s, trying to make an opportunity for themselves, and meanwhile it ends up becoming an opportunity for me years later. So I actually connected with Martin in like the early 2000s. I never saved the email conversation I had with him. But when I was just a kid and I was discovering Mystique and going online and finding stuff. And I started reaching out to, so this is how I get involved. So I started reaching out in the early 2000s as a kid, like in grade school. I graduated grade school in 2002. Around 2001, 2002, 2003, I'm reaching out to these folks that I'm finding online that are, you know, just literally in a forum somewhere random. They have like a list of 100 bands they want. We'll trade, we'll buy, whatever for any of these artists. Like literally, that's all it is. Mystique, 1985. I get their information. I emailed them and say, hey, what do you know about that band? Why are you looking for them? Like blah, blah, blah. Have you heard the music, this and that? And they would get back to me and they would tell me things like, oh yeah, like I read about them in the record collector's guide, right? I saw the picture or whatever. Then that's how I started discovering that they, you know, existed in these books that Martin had written. And that was when I was in I've been working on this film since I was a kid, really, if you think about it. But that's when I started doing research and stuff. And that's when I reached out to Martin. Just, you know, I had to look around to find out what guide he was even talking about, the gentleman I'm like having an email conversation with. Then I find the book, this one, and there's the other one too, that they're in both of these books. So then I find who authored the books. And then I reached out to him, found his contact information. And you know, Martin, like he's fairly approachable. Like he's not like a big star. It's not like if you email him, it's just going to go into the internet and just disappear.
He'll get back to you.
Yeah, it's not like if you emailed like a big celebrity like Brad Pitt, he's not going to get back to you probably. Right. But anyways, so even as a kid, I emailed him and said, hey, like I heard that Mystique's in this book. Like, how did you discover him? This and that. And I remember he sent me an email. We had just a quick email conversation back and forth. And he explained to me how he discovered their music and stuff like that. He was actually really cool about it. I wish I saved those emails. So I had a conversation with him like 20 years ago that I don't even think, if you ask him about it, I don't think he remembers that.
Did you say, like, at what point did you say, by the way, you know, I'm the singer's nephew?
I might have said that because at that time, just to go into a little bit more of how I was involved with spreading the music, when I would reach out to these folks who were looking for this music, there wasn't YouTube back then. You could not hear the music unless you had it.
Right.
So I would reach out to them and I'd say, hey, have you heard this music and blah, blah, blah. And oftentimes they didn't. So I'd reproduce the music because I had my uncle's tapes. I'd actually create tapes with Black Rider on one side and I Am the King on the other side, and or Rock and Roll Party Tonight as part of that tape combination or whatever. And I would label it and I'd write all the songs and stuff like this on the label, and I would actually mail it to them. And I'd say, well, I can't sell you the album because I only have one, but I can, if you want to hear the music, I'll send you the tape. So I sent tapes out to Switzerland, Norway, California. Sometimes they'd send me stuff back. Like I wasn't asking for anything. I just said, I want you to hear the music. I got a vinyl. I ended up giving it away to a friend of mine. I think the band was Madhouse, and it was like a vinyl, like an LP, like a big vinyl. And it looked like granite. The vinyl was like a custom vinyl kind of thing. And it was really indie and stuff like this. It was cool. I listened to it and I gave it to a friend of mine. But so I started connecting with folks, and I would probably tell them, hey, that was my uncle's band and I can send you the music if you want to hear it. So I was just sending it out, but they had already had international appeal. I'll get back to your point, but they already had international appeal because this Ted Smirnos, who produced the album, he traveled to, I think, Scotland and Greece and tried to push the album. They traveled to France. And even when they went to France, they had the EPs and we're trying to push them around, right? So this actually came out on the 30th anniversary. It's autographed by a few of the guys. This actually came out on a Greece label, Eat Metal Records.
That's the one I've got.
Yeah.
It's not signed, but yeah, that's the version I've got. It's eatmetalrecords.com. It's copyright date of 2016 on it.
Yeah, so that's the 30th anniversary, and that's an official release with cooperation from the band. There's photos in there. There's actually like bootlegs and stuff of Black Rider EPs that were on CD that came out all over the world, Japanese and all kinds of stuff. But to get back to the point about Martin, so I had that conversation with him back then, 20 years ago now. When I started thinking about doing this documentary, of course, I remembered him. I had gone out and got his books to show my uncle, be like, look, look, look. And I remember, and I thought it was just so coincidentally, he lived in Toronto, so he was close by. And I reached out to him and asked him if he'd be interested in doing something. And I think he's fairly approachable, and I think he's interested in doing stuff like this. So he fit me into his schedule. He was the first interview I did for this documentary. And I remember him telling me before we met, he said, like, I don't know a lot about this band, so you need to be very specific with your questions. And I was like, don't worry about it. And I wrote out a whole bunch of questions, like pages of them. I went over there for a band he didn't know a lot about. We filmed for, I think, almost an hour and 45 minutes. And for a band that he didn't know a lot about, I learned about them talking to him. That's how amazing his mind is.
That doesn't surprise me.
A lot of the questions were like, specifically about the music. I actually sent him a copy of the 30th anniversary so he could refresh his memory and listen to the music and whatever, give his thoughts about stuff. But other than the specific questions about the music and about the band and stuff like this, like I asked him a lot of questions of hypotheticals, like, okay, a band like Mystique in around 1988 trying to do this, what did they have to? And he would be able to, I think he appreciated the exercise of, that's my alarm to remind me that we're doing the show, which we were supposed to film
started early.
But I think he appreciated the exercise of like, it was like an exercise.
Yeah.
Let's go back in time and let's talk about a band like this at this time. What would they have had to done? Why did this not work out? What could they have done? Blah, blah, blah. And we filmed for like an hour and 45 minutes. And he was surprised. And I was amazed, like I was blown away by the information that he gave, because even I ended up walking away and understanding the band better by talking to him. And I think before I left, he's like, here's my phone number. He's like, call me when you get a chance. And then after I left, I think it was like the next day or that week, I remember calling him on a lunch break from, I think I was actually just doing my student placement at the time. And I gave him a call, and he was just blown away by how professional we were and how it turned out, that he was thinking maybe about asking me if I was interested in doing something. So that's how the Contrarians came about, because he basically said, okay, let me go away and think of something. And then he was on Banger Films a lot more often back then, and they had a thing called Locked Horns.
Yes.
Where they would talk about, they would do discussions about bands. And I think Sean Dunn, which is Sean Dunn, right? Who was the host of that? Sam Dunn?
Yeah.
He was the host of that. And I think Martin had the reputation of being, oh, you're the Contrarian, here you go, Professor Martin Popoff, he's always picking the album, whatever. So I think that's where that kind of came from. It had its roots in Banger Films, Banger TV. And he came up with the concept, basically. I was just like, yeah, let's do it. So we went back with the same film crew. It was me, my buddy Aaron, and my buddy Nick, who's on the show. He's a Contrarian. Aaron has since moved on, but he's still a really good friend of mine. He helped me film this. He got his bachelor's in film and television. Nick went to Metalworks and went to school there, and he did music stuff. So he's kind of like my audio guy. So we went back and we filmed the original episodes of the Contrarians, but that's how the Contrarians started. Now that's kind of become its own thing.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah. And and all of us that have been on the Contrarians, a lot of us all have our own YouTube channels now. So it just grows. It's just kind of cool how it started. Like you said, like your uncle's band, like kind of planted the seed for this many, many years ago. So the documentary, like you said, you've been working on it for a long time. As of, let's say July 2022, I know that there's going to be a viewing party. What else is going on with the documentary?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about things that I'd like to do, and I've talked to the band. I think right now we're focusing on the premiere, which is in Hamilton, Ontario, which makes the most sense. It's going to be at the Westdale Theatre on September 16th. And tickets are available at eventbrite.ca. So anybody I know you're a Canadian show, I know you're not from Hamilton, you might have some viewers from the area.
Yep.
If you can make it out, because the more successful stuff like this is, I think it's going to prompt other bands to follow. So you might see other obscure bands, and they all, like the Mystique documentary is an interesting story. I think if you don't know a lot about them, but you're interested in that kind of music, I think you'll appreciate a lot about the documentary. So that's going to come out as a premiere. We're really focusing on that right now. Down the road, what we would like to do is, maybe reach out to a label like Eat Metal Records, see if they're interested in producing the thing as a physical copy, which I know even at this in 2022, physical stuff is becoming passe. But I do know that a lot of metal collectors like physical stuff.
I'd love to have a Blu-ray of it.
Exactly.
See it.
So
I'm a long way from Hamilton.
I'd love to see it on VHS, but like I think it would be cool to release it as a DVD
at
or
least
a
do a DVD Blu-ray, but make the case look like a VHS tape.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
But there's so much footage. Like I did about 12 or 13 interviews. Every interview went over an hour. So I ended up with like 20 plus hours of interview footage. There's so much music. There's so much images. There's some video even that like I could easily, like we've already talked about either extending the documentary itself, because I want to shoot the premiere and tag it on the end as kind of like the ending, the real ending. Because some Mystique guys will be there, and I'm going to bring them up to take a bow and stuff like Martin Popoff's going to be there. So I want to film the premiere. But there's going to be a lot of extended and bonus things that I'd like to put on a physical release if we ever do one. So that's something I'm thinking of. I mean, there are streaming services and stuff like this. At the same time, it is very niche, right? Yeah. So I think targeting it towards metal collectors, because there have been people who follow our social media pages that message and say, oh, I'm from another country, but I'd love to see the movie. Hope you guys put it out somewhere so I can see it. You know what I mean? So there has been some interest around the world. And I think targeting the metal audience itself and those collectors by putting out a physical copy is more, it's maybe casting a smaller net, but I think you'll catch more fish that way. And I'm not trying to call metal fans or people that are going to buy the DVD fish. That's not what I'm trying to insinuate. But I think I think that'll be more of a successful venture than putting it on like a streaming service, which I don't even know what it takes to get on a streaming service. I'm going to pursue that at some point, but that I don't know. Yeah, we'll see. There's a lot of different things we could do, but I definitely want to make a physical thing of it so people can keep it and own it. I want to put it on my shelf and keep it and own it.
I'd love to have a copy of it. I mean, as far as niche goes, I mean, Marco, you know, I wrote a book about 8 tracks, so
that's right.
I know all about it.
And I love that book. I have it here.
Oh, and speaking of which, I know there. Thank you for that.
Beautiful book. Mark, I don't know how many copies are left, but try to find it.
They're sold out. They're sold out. They are available in the PDF if somebody just wants a read-only form. Get in touch with me. But threw me off track there. We were in talks back and forth. You were thinking about getting the music put onto an 8-track.
Yeah, so I was looking to get that done. Just a custom 8-track for me, just to own it, because I think that would be really cool and interesting to have that on my shelf. And I've reached out to a couple people. It hasn't materialized yet, but I have been looking at stuff like that. And if that ever happens, I don't know if we'll ever produce
I'd love to have it. That'd be cool too, to have a Mystique Black Rider EP on 8-track.
If we run a series of them, I'll let you know. You'll be the first in line.
Awesome. So where is the easiest place? I know that you maintain the site about the documentary. Where's the easiest place for people to find out about the documentary, about the band?
So the Eventbrite page has a little write-up and has some images and some videos. There's a little trailer on there. And I didn't play the last clip if you want me to play that.
Yes, let's see the last clip.
Sorry, just to get back to your question. So we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and we're on Twitter, and there's a YouTube page. So you can find Mystique stuff if you're interested. So the Instagram, the YouTube, and the Twitter are run by me. I'm an admin of the Facebook page, but that was actually put together by John and Ray. So if you want to reach out to the band, go to Facebook. I think it's Mystique Official at Mystique Official 30th or something like this. But you can just Google search them or Facebook.
Look for the logo.
There's 2 Mystique pages on Facebook. I started one years ago that was just kind of like as a fan page. Like I started because there wasn't anything like that back then. And then I ended up like leaving it. It was an old Facebook profile that I can't access anymore. So it just exists on its own.
Okay.
But there is an official one. So find the official one, because that's the one where all the documentary stuff is getting posted to. And then on Instagram, Film Mystique, Twitter, Film Mystique, just look up Film Mystique, you'll find me. And that's where you can contact me. So if you want the band, go to Facebook. If you want me, go to Instagram, Twitter. And then this last clip. So this is actually from that interview I did with Martin Popoff back in 2017 or 18. I think it was early January 2018. So this is us filming, interviewing Martin Popoff. This is a little bit more centered on him talking about his book. So let me play this for the audience at home. And again, none of these clips have been seen before. So this is the first time anybody's seen any of these clips in public. And the film is completed. It's been completed for a while, but it will be premiering. So let me share my screen and I'll play this for about 30 seconds or so. It'll load for a second, but this is Martin Popoff in his office.
So I did a book called Goldmine Heavy Metal Records Price Guide, and I also did a lot of the other Goldmine books as well. So we put a picture of the Mystique EP in the price guide. I mean, there's a lot of pictures in there, but, you know, we wanted to put stuff that had that sort of wow factor. But, you know, I put it in there because it looks awesome in there. Those scrappy indie graphics with the, you know, the Grim Reaper on the horse and the text and all that stuff. It just looks really cool when you turn the page and see stuff like that. You know, great band title, great cover, maybe a little bit occultish. That kind of stuff always tended to be the highest price stuff. It was an EP. EPs are always kind of interesting. LPs tended to be pressed in a little bit higher quantities than EPs. You know, the cover art was just this crude line drawing in black and white. I bet it made it look rare and collectible. You know, and it's from Canada. Canada is didn't produce a lot of stuff. Canada is looked at as a little bit of an exotic country to Americans, or certainly to Europeans or to Japanese people. It's coming from a smaller mid-sized town like Hamilton. It's not like in the big media glare of Toronto or something like that. Just cool songs, longer songs, good performances, a little bit fantasy and underground, you know, like Warlord or some of the early Metal Blade kind of stuff. So that all adds up. And yeah, and the album cover. I mean, you look at this thing, and it's just immediately, it just looks like a crazy rarity. It looks British too, and it's, you know, Death and Darky, and it's got the you know, the Grim Reaper on a horse, the religious writing, the you know, the indie writing up here, the fantasy writing. It's just everything about it is just like mystical.
So the other neat thing about the documentary is a lot of the information you get out of it, you can apply to just record collecting in general. And yeah, Martin was perfect person to talk to about, like, why are people buying this now? Like, why is it years later people want to own something that, you know what I mean, from the 80s or whatever. So he's able to bring his expertise of metal collecting and what his knowledge of music is. And, you know,
he made me think of something in that clip too. I mean, this almost looks like it could have been, when he said it looks British, this almost could be like a new wave of British heavy metal EP from the looks of it too, right? And musically, it's not really that far off from, you know, maybe like early Maiden or even something like Diamond Head, or so. Yeah,
they get lumped in with the new wave of British heavy metal kind of thing sometimes, and and I think people who collect that type of music are interested in this EP.
It's very new wave of British heavy metal friendly for sure. So, Marco, this has been a fascinating sort of trip through time for your uncle's band, and yeah, I definitely would like to see this. Yeah, so yeah, I'm really going to be one of those people pushing for a physical copy of this. So follow, of course, Marco's on the Contrarians, always doing new episodes. You know, and it's always great to sit in on one of those panels. I love it when we have our group discussion panels. I make as many of those as I can. What's coming up for the Contrarians?
For the Contrarians, I mean, we've got a lot of stuff in the can. We've started a new series called The Worst Of, which is where we take a big band. The idea was, okay, all these bands keep re-releasing their old material. Like, you'll see the double deluxe editions now. You get the box sets of single albums now. And all the compilation albums and stuff like this, best ofs and greatest hits and all this stuff. So we thought it would be interesting. You know, these bands are already right in that ballpark. Why not, you know, put out an album, the worst of this band?
Yeah.
Let's try to get a little bit more money out of the folks who collect albums. And honestly, like, since we've been doing this, you know, there's only been one episode that's up, but we're filming more episodes of Worst Of. And it's interesting because I think metal collectors would buy these compilations if they came out. But what if a band said, okay, they want the best of our band? Okay, well, here's our worst compilation list. And honestly, I think people buy that. So we've actually, we've created graphics and stuff. So you'll see the cover, you'll see the vinyl labels, and I try to make it look as authentic as possible. And we've we've filmed those are going to start coming up more often. So look out for those ones. But we've
Yeah.
always, like, literally we have videos going up like every other day almost nowadays. There's about like 3 videos a week because we film a lot of stuff.
So be on the lookout for that, and be on the lookout for the Mystique documentary premiere. I think you said it was September 16th.
That's right.
Okay. So Marco, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to me about this. And I'd recommend everybody go check this out. Even if you just go on YouTube, type in Mystique Black Rider. It's good stuff.
Thanks for having me, Tim. I appreciate it a lot.
All right. Thanks everyone for watching this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions.